instead of falling into the turn and actually cornering or carving a turn. So we have to do something that cues our body to get into an athletic position, and that's either going to be getting that outside foot down or just dipping slightly with that outside foot for a moment. One of the things that we want to really think about and start to really be cognizant of is what we're trying to do with our bicycle when we're cornering. We're trying to push our bicycle into the terrain that we're riding on, and we're trying to press it down into that terrain and create the situation that we talked about when we were braking, where we're riding inside our bicycles. And what I mean by that is we want to be pressuring the bicycle to the point where we're creating some sag into the suspension, or if we don't have suspension, we're creating some compression into the tires of the bicycle, and that's going to be our suspension in that instance. And we're giving ourselves both positive and negative travel, so that if I'm coming through a turn, I can absorb bumps still, or if I hit a little washboard or a hole in the trail, I can also fill that in with my suspension's travel.
What would you say would be the fundamental turn or the fundamental turning technique?
I think flatland turns are probably the most fundamental. Most fundamental turn you could do, and I think probably the most overlooked turn, even at a pro level, because you're so likely to concentrate on this rock garden or this double, or something that really grabs your attention because maybe it brings fear or some sort of uncomfortable feeling to you, and so you really want to conquer that. And really, in watching races and having seen a lot of racers and races, I think a lot of races are won and lost on the more simple sections that are often overlooked.
Yeah.
And I think having that core ability to really just rail a flatland turn is going to not only make you faster through flatland turns, it's going to bring a lot of speed to your other turns as well. Obviously, with a flatland turn, maybe other than an off-camber turn, it's probably going to be your most difficult turn. You're going to have a lot easier time when you have some backing, when you have a berm behind you. So yeah, teaching flatland turns, I think, is really at the essence of turning, because you don't have that crutch, and so you really need to look to those physical cues that a rider is using to bring themselves through the turn. Are they bringing their inside knee in and then turning their head, shoulders, and hips to follow? Are they doing all those things? On a berm, you might not notice if they're doing that because you can just kind of just sit on top of your bicycle and
you got to get that inside corner edge of the tire to dig in, as opposed to
just sitting on top of the flat part of the knobby.
Mountain biking traditionally takes place in a pretty three-dimensional environment. Because of that, unlike a road motorcycle rider, I'm not going to be leaning my body and the bicycle at the same time. If I were to do this, I would inevitably hit something loose on the ground that would cause my bicycle to slide out. Because of that, I want to pressure my inside row of knobbies into the ground. In order to do that, I'm going to lean the bicycle, but not the rider, on a flatland turn. This is going to ensure that I'm driving my point of traction straight down into the ground where the traction is provided, pushing the inside row of knobbies into the ground squarely. This is going to be achieved through hip flexion. Because I'm leaning the bicycle and not the rider, the rider must bend in some place, and that's going to occur at the hip. As I bend at the hip, I still maintain a lot of positive pressure through my hip and my up hand to put into the suspension to create control. This control causes me to be able to ride inside the bicycle in a state where my suspension is partially compressed. I want to ride inside the bicycle so that I have control for bumps that come at me, but also for holes or any sort of roots or things in the trail where my suspension needs to come back out to find the ground.
One of the most important things that we can do is to create a situation where our body is upright but our bicycle is turning. If you think about it, if I take my bicycle and my body and I start to lean over, what's happening to my arrows? They're no longer driving straight down into the ground. They're driving out, and at some point they're going to diffract off the ground. Out goes my bike and down I go. So if I'm going to come through a flatland turn properly, I'm going to have to bend somewhere in order to keep my body relatively upright. Sure, I'm going to lean into the turn a little bit, but at some point, if I lean too far, the bike's gone. So I have to create a hinge, and that hinge is going to be created at my hip. When I'm coming into a corner, there's a moment at which I'm going to go from coming down the trail to actually executing a turn. And I want to make sure that at that moment that I put all my potential energy, all of my speed, all of my weight coming down the trail into my bicycle to create positive control. Now, when I do that, basically what I'm doing is loading a lot of pressure into my outside leg, particularly my outside quad. And that has really two very helpful components to it, one of which is control. I've got a lot of pressure into my outside foot, which is making my knobby bite into the ground more effectively, but even more than that, I'm creating a lot of positive energy, a lot of potential energy into my outside quad. And as I get through the apex of that turn, I'm just kind of going to let that energy just drain out of that outside leg, and that's going to propel me forward.
You can notice that sometimes if you see somebody hit a small turn really hard, they almost kind of jump out of it. You know, that's on a on a sharper one. That's basically the releasing of that tension to cause acceleration.
If I come into a turn and I'm not really pushing very hard, I'm going to have to work pretty hard to get through that turn. But if I've pushed hard, I've created a lot of positive pressure into my outside leg and into my suspension, I'm almost going to get a free moment going from one turn to the next, where I almost don't even have contact with the ground or the potential to make a mistake. The way we do an off-camber turn is going to be very similar to the way we do a flatland turn, with a couple of notable exceptions. One of the things that we're going to concentrate on with an off-camber turn is to keep a little bit more bend in our outside knee. This is because the bicycle is more likely to slide down and away from us, so we want to have more of that negative travel with our leg to be able to extend out and make up for a situation like that. The other thing we're going to do is, in addition to looking where we want to go as we enter the turn and looking through the turn, we're going to keep our chin pointed just slightly uphill from where we normally would on a flatland turn, just to offset the effects that the hill is going to have wanting to kind of pull us off of it. So we're just going to turn our chin just a couple of degrees in toward the uphill side of the slope. We've talked about the arrows on a flatland turn being pointed directly into the ground. Now we've got a situation where the ground is sloping away from us. So the other thing we're going to have to exaggerate a little bit is getting our hip up over the bicycle to pressure straight down into the ground. So we're going to basically utilize a little bit more hip flexion than we did on the flatland turn.
What do you think is a good example of a turn where it's perfectly acceptable to keep your pedals level the whole way through, and you're not going to be tempted really, or it's not necessary to do any dipping or outside foot weighting?
A couple situations. One is where there's a lot of three-dimensional terrain underneath you, and you don't want to get your pedals caught up. Either that, or where there's some banking to the turn, like a berm turn, where you just want to do like a really quick little turns. I would say the longer the radius of that turn, the more you're probably going to get outside pressure, just because you're going to feel the inertia of the turn.
Right.
And it's going to bring you either into a little bit of dipping or maybe even down to the bottom. Another situation is when you're in a berm turn where you want to just lean the bicycle down, and speed of the trail dictates that you really can't get enough speed to need to lean it past the angle of the berm.
Right.
So at that point, you're not really using any falling in. I mean, if you think about the arrows that we talked about before on a flatland turn, those arrows are pointing straight into the ground.
Right.
Now when I'm on a bank turn, I'm up on, and the arrows are now pointing into that bank turn.
Right. This is a turn with like fully enough support.
With enough support for the speed that the trail's taking you.
Yeah.
But beyond the point at which the bicycle, once the bicycle leans past the angle of the berm, I'm going to need to either get some hip flexion or create a little bit of outside pedal pressure, because think about what my arrows are doing. My arrows were pointing straight into the berm. Now they're going to start coming down here. They're going to start wanting to deflect off, and my tires are going to want to slide off.
Right.
So at that point, I'm going to want to get a little bit more pressure into my outside foot. And the other thing about that is, in order to lean the bicycle over, I'm probably going to have to dip a little bit just to bring that inside knee up and give myself something to fall in around. And that's going to really be my physical cue to kind of getting me into a turn like that,
right,
at greater speed.
So yeah, and so most of the berm turns, you're going to be pretty level with the bike, right? You're not going to be leaning the bike. You're going to be keeping the pedal or the bike level, so as to keep that downward pressure into the
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And then at the point at which you get to that same angle as the bank of the turn, once you want to go beyond that, then you're going to start to lean the bike a little bit more, and the rider will look a little bit upright in relation to the bicycle, but will still be leaned at the angle of the berm.
Right.
Switchback turns are some of the most difficult turns for a lot of riders to negotiate, and there's kind of a reason for that.